Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Friday, March 29th, 2024. Say the line. Hey, good Friday morning to you, everybody. It's Good Friday, and the one time of year when the line makes sense, even though I keep doing it over and over again, and making no sense with it, I guess, presumably. But today I get to make sense on account of holiday. So there you have it. And I don't know. That's it. And I'm trying to think of a way to get around to saying turpitudinous again today. By the way, I strongly object to the idea that turpitudinal should not be an acceptable form to this. I don't know really why but I was thinking about it, and I guess I was forming it in my head, not knowing which direction to go with this and how to turn it into the adjective that I was looking for. But I guess I just was thinking, like, we say longitudinal, so I thought maybe turpitudinal. Maybe the tude thing was the tip to that. I mean, we can't run around, or can imagine running around saying something was a longitudinous, right? And I wondered whether I could get to the bottom of why it would be one or the other, and I'm sure that there's an explanation, and it's still been bothering me. But all I know is we said turpitudinous, and I'm proud of that. Eventually, even though it took some correcting to get around to it. You just don't hear that on podcasting again these days. And why, when I was young, all right, nobody ever used it when I was young either, but there you have it. Anyway, breaking news happening just now. Well, not happening right now, but breaking right now. It happened earlier. That's how it became news. Actor Louis Gossett Jr., as it happens, noted here by Phil Lewis, who puts this news into my social media stream, the first black man to win Best Supporting Actor Oscar, the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor, you know, this is headline language, has died. He is 87 years old, so ripe old age, but there you have it. That's so sad news for a lot of people who remember his movies. I certainly recall seeing him in several. And, I don't know, I'm not a big, movie buff or anything, but, certainly among the more recognizable faces in Hollywood, for those, instead of saying of a certain age, we'll say for those familiar with a certain era, let's say, in Hollywood history. So sad news there, but, just thought I would inject it into your day's news stream as well. I got other awful, horrible, tragic news to tell you as well, but the tragedy is less generalized, I guess, and more politically specific. So many stories to catch up on today. Friday is a good day for the long reads that have escaped our more intensive attention, if not our attention entirely, in pocket. And we want to double back and get a couple of those things taken care of. And I don't know, I don't have an opening riff for you today, except to do the Good Friday thing, and to say turpitudinous as many times as possible. But I do have a raft of stories of my own to catch you up with, and I don't know, here we go. How about this one? Procedural story. From the procedural front, the Hill reported the other day, caught my eye with the headline, House to send Mayorkas impeachment charges to Senate on April 10th, which was interesting because, of course, you already know that the House impeached Secretary Mayorkas some time ago. And I guess, we're always wondering about the mechanics of this sort of procedure and when will it go to the Senate. We know that it has to go to the Senate, but we don't know when, and nothing says when, and we wondered when we would be hearing something about it. But because we understood at the time that the Mayorkas impeachment, the impeachment itself, I mean, that's done, but that the trial and the question of whether or not he would be convicted and removed from office by the Senate was a question that was going nowhere. And so we had zero expectation, really, of ever hearing anything materially interesting about the subject ever again. And that allowed the fact that, for whatever reason, the Republicans hesitated for quite some time in sending these papers over to the Senate. And you wonder why. And by the way, of course, because it's happening and it involves Republicans, there's a tremendous opportunity not only for misunderstanding of the process, incompetence in the process, delay in the process, but of course, hypocrisy in the process. And here it is. Let's see. Alexander Bolton reporting the story for The Hill begins this way. Speaker Mike Johnson and House Republican impeachment managers informed Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer in a letter yesterday, that they will send 2 impeachment charges against Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas to the Senate on April 10th, which is interesting on a number of levels, not least of which is, what's today? It's Friday, March 29th. What are we waiting for April 10th for? And in fact, how long have we been waiting this whole time anyway? Well, I guess it speaks to the seriousness of the charges, I suppose, that we haven't heard of the charges having been transmitted already. But again, as I mentioned, there is an opportunity for hypocrisy here, and so Republicans will take it. House Republicans are accusing Mayorkas, of course, of, quote, high crimes and misdemeanors, including, quote, willful and systemic refusal to comply with the law and his breach of the public trust, unquote. Both charges that the Department of Homeland Security and Democrats vehemently deny. That means the long-awaited charges, long-awaited. Well, by whom? Good question. But it means the long-awaited charges will arrive in the upper chamber on Wednesday after senators return to Washington from the 2-week Easter recess. But that's how dire an emergency this whole thing was. There's high crimes and misdemeanors. There's willful, what the hell did they say? Willful and systemic refusal to comply with the law. Like, that's serious business. We have to impeach this person. That's how serious this is. When should we get around to it? Why don't you guys go on vacation for a couple of weeks and we'll take care of it after you get back? But it's worse than that. And of course, so is the hypocrisy. The move will force the Senate to take up the matter, at least formally. So this is a good introduction to what might happen next. And then Schumer will have to decide, based on, of course, his measure of support from his caucus as the majority, and he may or may not be consulting with Republicans on this one. But the Senate, Schumer will have to decide whether to hold a full trial on the Senate floor, as they might do with a presidential impeachment, the impeachment with which most Americans are most familiar, I guess you would say, or vote to dismiss the charges immediately. That's a thing that they can do, or refer it to a special evidentiary committee, which is what happens to what I guess is you would actually have to call most impeachments, because there are far more not far more, but there are more impeachments, certainly more impeachments of other people, i.e. federal judges, typically, than there are of presidents. And so anyway, the judicial impeachment process typically involves referring it to the Judiciary Committee, and they hold the trial there and then make a recommendation as to what to do to the full Senate, and the full Senate simply adopts their recommendation, or doesn't, depending on their mood, but they do. Anyway, but this is the part where Republicans get the chance to be gigantic hypocrites about it, as we said there. So they're sending it to the Senate on April 10th, and they announce their intention to send it after the 2-week recess with the following comment. We urge you to schedule a trial of the matter expeditiously, Johnson wrote in a letter, also signed by House Homeland Security Committee Chair Mark Green, Republican of Tennessee, and House Foreign Affairs Committee Chair Michael McCall, also a Republican, of course, and he from Texas. The evidence on both charges is clear, comprehensive, and compelling, and the House's solemn act to impeach the first sitting cabinet official in American history, in case you were wondering how often that had happened and what do they usually do with those impeachments, But their the solemn act to impeach the first sitting cabinet official in American history demands timely action by the Senate, they wrote. Timely action. You may recall, as we said, these impeachment charges were laid quite some time ago, and they don't get it. It's interesting. They should have put this in the very next paragraph. But in case you were wondering, the answer is February 13th. In case you're wondering what the question is, when did the House adopt these articles of impeachment? The answer, February 13th. When are they delivering to the Senate? The answer, 2 months later. I was going to say 2 months hence, but I guess 2 months hence only applies if we're sitting here now at February 13th. When will you deliver them? 2 months hence. And if you were 1.5 months further along the line, I guess the hence doesn't really work. I don't know. You tell me. It's quite a literary show. Anyway, linguistics are a big part of what we do. But look at how much verbiage they include in between, reminding you that, the House has been sitting on these impeachment papers for 2 months, or will have been sitting on them for 2 months by the time they actually deliver them. And it comes with a letter urging the Senate to act expeditiously too. And by the way, on April 10th, they'll deliver it. And if on April 11th, the Senate hasn't yet resolved what to do with them, the House Republicans will be out there screaming about the delay and how dare they, and And I mean, easy answer to say, you guys sat on these things for 2 months, but, will it be reported? Maybe 5 paragraphs later. So as we said, here's what gets shoehorned in between, right? Okay, so where do we leave off with the reading? Means the long-awaited charges will arrive after the Easter recess. The move will force the Senate to decide how to deal with this stuff. We urge you to schedule a trial of the matter expeditiously, right? Oh, and by the way, I did forget to say, I was interested in the inclusion in the letter of the chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Now, this is the impeachment of a member of the United States government, of the cabinet, the president's cabinet. And it's interesting the way they treat it. Like, okay, I understand why the House Homeland Security Committee is involved. Homeland Security is responsible for border issues. And I guess their argument is, well, it's also a foreign affairs issue because the people coming into the country are coming from foreign countries, and so therefore foreign affairs. It's really not. It does that. Foreign affairs is our relationship with their government, and although we certainly have to deal with the Mexican government about this issue, it's not as a foreign affairs issue primarily. It's as a homeland security issue for us. So I don't know. I think that was just somebody else trying to get in on the limelight, and they probably gave him a role. I didn't pay enough attention to their version of the impeachment process to know whether or not the Foreign Affairs Committee actually played any role in the impeachment or not. But Michael McCall certainly feels like he's entitled to credit for having done so. Anyway, so here's everything else that they shoehorned in between. The Republican accusation that Democrats were somehow dragging their feet on this, and then the realization that it was in fact Republicans who were dragging their feet on this. It goes like this. The charges require a vote by 2/3 of the Senate to convict Mayorkas and remove him from office. And by the way, unclear about whether or not they hold a separate vote on that, if only because they haven't done that with a cabinet secretary before. And we're not sure how they're going to hold the trial. Oh, okay, right. Back to the actual verbiage. We demand timely action. Then they tell us the charges require a 2/3 vote to convict and remove him from office. If he cares about the Constitution and ending the devastation caused by Biden's border catastrophe, what garbage, Senator Schumer will quickly schedule a full public trial and hear the arguments put forth by our impeachment managers, Johnson said in a statement after releasing the letter. DHS on Thursday reiterated its earlier statement calling the move a baseless, unconstitutional impeachment. House Republicans will be remembered by history for trampling on the Constitution for political gain rather than working to solve the serious challenges at our border, DHS said in the statement, noting that Mayorkas spent weeks working with a bipartisan group of Senate negotiators on an immigration package. Without a shred of evidence or legitimate constitutional grounds, and despite bipartisan opposition, House Republicans have falsely smeared a dedicated public servant who has spent more than 20 years enforcing our laws and serving our country. Now, only now do they then say, the House voted narrowly on February 13th. That's all that time to get around to, oh yeah, by the way, almost all of what came above from Republicans is garbage. The House voted narrowly on February 13th to impeach Mayorkas on 2 charges by a vote of 214 to 213, by the way. A week after an earlier vote on the House floor failed 214 to 216. 3 House Republicans joined Democrats in voting against the charges. They were, of course, Representatives Ken Buck, Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin, now also quitting along with Ken Buck, and Tom McClintock of California. So I guess if you're looking to speculate about another Republican who might opt to leave early, I don't know that he's actually considering it, but I did see people trying to game out, were there any other Republicans interested in doing so? So far, the 2 people who have quit early constitute 2 of the group of 2 of the 3 Republicans who voted against the Mayorkas impeachment. So I guess that's pretty good grounds to speculate about McClintock if you're into it. Schumer has refused to say how he will handle the impeachment articles once they arrive in the Senate, only criticizing the allegations as a sham and unsubstantiated by evidence. House Republicans failed to produce any evidence that Secretary Mayorkas has committed any crime, Schumer said the day after the House approved the charges. House Republicans failed to show that he violated the Constitution. House Republicans failed to present evidence of anything resembling an impeachable offense, he declared. This is a new low for who? House Republicans. I guess he really wanted to get that in there. And good. He should. Schumer's office said Thursday that once the House impeachment managers present the articles of impeachment to the Senate, senators will be sworn in as jurors in the trial the next day. And Senate President pro tempore Patty Murray will preside over the chamber. At that point, senators could vote immediately to dismiss the charges or refer it to an evidentiary committee. A third option would be to allow the House impeachment managers to conduct a full trial on the floor. House Republicans rebutted Schumer's criticism in their letter on Thursday. They said they adopted a methodical approach, that's in quotes, that led them to conclude Mayorkas, quote, refused to comply with the requirements of immigration laws passed by Congress. In fact, he directed through a series of memoranda Homeland Security employees to violate U.S. immigration laws, they wrote. Throughout his tenure, he has repeatedly lied to Congress and the American people about the scope of the crisis and his role in it. His unlawful actions are responsible for the historic crisis that has devastated communities throughout our country, from the smallest border town in Texas to New York City. New York City? Yeah. Well, however, their assessment is at odds with immigration law experts, those guys, who determined Mayorkas' policies were not in conflict with existing statutes. How odd. And their claims that he lied to Congress are based largely on exchanges in which he disagreed with lawmakers over whether the border was under control. The other House impeachment managers who signed the letter were, maybe that's why. Is the Foreign Affairs Committee chair one of the managers? I guess the other managers who signed the letter were Representatives Andy Biggs of Arizona, lunatic nut job, and isn't he the guy who thought to say that the January 6th rioters and insurrectionists were just tourists? Was that him? Clay Higgins, another complete nut bar. This is really some collection so far. Ben Klein of Virginia. Higgins is from Louisiana, by the way. Michael Guest of Mississippi. Andrew Garbarino of New York. Murdery Trader Green of Wackadoodle Junction. And, I've never heard of some of these people. August Pfluger, Pfluger. Heavy emphasis on the Luger, I'm sure, part of it. From Texas, Harriet Hageman of Wyoming, and Laurel Lee of Florida. So the alliterative caucus bringing up the rear on that one. They should only have alliterative members be impeachment members. So, my guess is they're definitely not going to want to have anything happening on the Senate floor on C-SPAN too. I mean, I would think so. They might calculate that the gamble of is worth it to say, let these idiots broadcast to the nation how cuckoo bananas they really are. But I don't think that's a good bet. But, I mean, Biggs, Higgins are nut bars. We all know Murdery Trader Green, of course. We might learn more about how crazy the rest of these people are, but they signed the same letter as Murdery Trader Green, so they're not thinking straight to begin with. There's a little more here. Senate Republican leaders have pressed Schumer to hold a full trial on the Senate floor once the impeachment articles arrive in the chamber. But so what? What's interesting here is, the leverage is backwards in all of this. I guess I'll get back to this one. We'll read through the rest of the article. But note to self, there's two things I wanted to go back to here. What are they? I don't know. The House of Representatives has determined that Secretary Mayorkas has committed impeachable offenses. That issue will come before the United States Senate. I believe the Senate needs to hold a trial, said Republican Whip John Thune. Let's see. Mitch McConnell later said he agreed with Thune. I think that would be the best way forward, he said, and then went into the hospital. The Senate last held an impeachment trial of a sitting cabinet member in 1876. Well, did they though? Because, well, remember, of course, they earlier said this is the first sitting cabinet member ever impeached in the history of the United States. And of course, we know that in 1876, when the Senate acquitted Secretary of War, who? Everyone say, William Belknap, on charges of criminally disregarding his duty and basely prostituting, his high office to his lust for private gain. Wow, prostituting to his lust. That's turpitudinous, if you ask me. Well, anyway, we may recall that, I don't know, maybe the chronology of it was, did they impeach him while he was still sitting in office and then he resigned, and then I think that might have been it. And then he decided to go ahead with the impeachment trial anyway, despite the fact that he had left office. And of course that became relevant in Trump's second impeachment. But yeah, anyway, all very interesting. Now, the two things that we wanted to go back to and consider were what? I don't know. I forgot. I've stuck my thumb in the air to remind myself that there was something I wanted to go back to. But I don't. Does it tell me what it was? Not really. Although I did want to note the narrowness of the margin of the 214 to 213 vote in the House. And just a reminder to everybody, well, one, that the week before it failed, 214 to 216. Then they finally squeaked it by 214 to 213. That's, again, the tale that I was telling you the other day about lots of people generally being absent from the House. It's a fairly large group. And it's going to be kind of a random thing as the House majority for the Republicans narrows further and further with more resignations. It's a minute-to-minute thing. It really, honestly, like, who's in the bathroom? The votes are supposed to be long enough that you can make it out of there, but I don't know. So now the question is, well, who has Crohn's disease? Who's got irritable bowel syndrome? Who's got a cold that day and didn't come to work? Who missed their flight? Right? That can affect the outcome of these things. So it might not. Here's the silver lining for Republicans, is they can say, it's not that I don't know how to count votes. It's that I don't know who's going to be here at any given moment. There's a large group of people to manage. With 435 members, there's going to be people gone. And with it split half and half, it's 50-50 that random disappearances will be Republican disappearances. But I don't think that was it. Let me skim on down here and see. Oh, yes. All right. Well, let's see. There was... So the House impeachment managers will present their articles of impeachment to the Senate. And that means Murdery Trader Green gets to walk across and show up on the Senate floor, which means she's running for Senate eventually. So let's see. Senate President Pro Tem Patty Murray will preside. Nothing happens. They come in and they say, they announce to the Senate president that, The House managers are there to present the articles. There's a reading, I think, of the articles of impeachment. And then they basically require that the House members march right straight back out. And then they take up their debate on whether or not to have, a trial on the floor, et cetera. Right. And that's what we were talking about. I think the leverages are all backwards and upside down on this one. This is an instance where you have Democrats, of course, probably universally inclined not to have the trial take place on the floor. Coin toss as to where Manchin and Sinema are on this thing. But presumably they're still kind of not, well, presumably they're not particularly interested in having this stupid thing fail on the floor in front of everybody. So maybe they continue to vote with Democrats. I suppose they could throw a wrench in the works and say they're going to vote with Republicans on this thing. But that's Schumer's real business, is to make sure that they, in their parting shots, are going to cooperate with the Democratic caucus one last time. But if the Republicans like McConnell and Thune want this thing to take place on the floor, I don't know how much leverage they really have to do that, right? And ordinarily they can say, well, we'll filibuster and thereby force this thing onto the floor. Except, like I said, the leverages are upside down and backwards. This is something that Democrats don't particularly want to come to the floor. And there's not a really great way to use the filibuster directly to force something onto the floor. It's a great way to force something from getting to the floor, right? So if Republicans were to say, well, we'll filibuster or we'll withhold our votes. From what? From the motion to bring this thing to the floor? Fine. Delay it still more. That would be fantastic. It's exactly what we're looking for. Oh, yeah, that's right. Well, they might target something else. Look out for that.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Winding up with this nonsense about the Mayorkas impeachment. It's just an interesting observation to watch this semi-historical thing happen. But as I was saying, I guess you got to watch out for Republicans to, the only place they could leverage the filibuster to affect the outcome here would be indirectly on something else. And to threaten to filibuster some important piece of business that Democrats do want to get to, unless there's action on the impeachment front, which, depends on what they pick to target and how effective they are in messaging the whole thing. But I suppose they could say, well, we're not going to, I'm not certain what they would pick. If they wanted to make Democrats care, they would say, well, filibuster, let's say, judicial appointments until you agree to, hold the Mayorkas trial on the Senate floor, to which Democrats would probably answer, you're already filibustering all the judicial appointments. Who cares? You need to tell me that you're filibustering something that you weren't going to filibuster before. And guess what? There isn't anything. Everything that we want to bring to the floor is subject to filibuster threat from Republicans. So that's zero leverage. We're not going to do it your way. And they should probably keep in mind, although that will, this will end in gridlock, but everything does. They should probably keep in mind that if they were to give in and hold the trial on the floor, a number of things would happen. First of all, Republicans would not stop threatening to filibuster everything else because they were going to filibuster it under some other threat anyway. It doesn't matter. You won't gain anything. And two, it's a filibuster in itself. Having this ridiculous trial take up Senate floor time is the equivalent of filibustering every other piece of business that they could be considering without even having to have a filibuster. So hopefully you don't give in to that. I guess, there's more nuance to it than that, of course, and the negotiations are such that, yes, occasionally they do reach an agreement and they say, well, if you give us this, we really will drop the filibuster on this and this. And then Rand Paul says, to hell with that, I'm still going to filibuster. And they say, he's just one guy. We'll outvote him. Let him do his speech, pretending he's filibustering. And then we'll outvote him. And that does happen. And Schumer has to have that in mind when he negotiates with McConnell and everybody else. They do occasionally honor agreements. So, something might come of it. But it'll be very little. So, but in other words, it's probably wise just to say, what can I tell you? Look, we're going to have a vote straight up. You vote for the way you want it, and we'll vote for the way we want it. And everybody understands that. And you'll be hard pressed to explain to people why you think that there should for some reason be a 60 vote threshold on the question of whether or not to proceed with a trial on the floor. It's you versus us, and there's more of us than there are of you, and you lose. That's it. That's the way it actually works. I think that's pretty easily explained. Plus, no one gives a crap. So there's also that. So that's my advice to those guys on that front. I think there was one other thing that I raised a finger about. It was probably my middle finger. Probably pointed at Mitch McConnell as well. Where did we get to? That raised this issue was the stupid charges that they actually formulated. That wasn't it, I don't think, because there's nothing there. The alliterative caucus, we definitely got to that point. I don't know. So the Republican commentary saying they've got to hold the trial. I don't know. I guess that's really kind of it. They are unlikely to succeed in that one, I think, but I don't know. I guess that's it. And then, of course, the Belknap thing, which is kind of funny and interesting all by itself. All right. Well, that's it for that stupid item. It consumed an awful lot of time as it is. We should get to, let's see, the next story confirming that every Republican accusation is a confession. We had one the other day. We read the story of, who was it? I should look in the archives and see. I can't recall offhand who it was and where it was, but we just read a story about another Republican somewhere who doubtless was spending their time screeching about voter fraud and then was in fact caught in a voter fraud pinch himself. Wasn't it? I can't remember where it was happening, but maybe I can bring it back to mind. But it was somebody who lived in one district over from where they were seeking it was a state legislative. Oh, yes, that's right. It was the person who held the seat just captured by the Democrat in the special election in Alabama, who was, who created the vacancy by being forced to resign because he didn't live in the district that he was voting in or that he was representing. And then he tried to vote in, and that was, that's voter registration fraud or something. You got to settle on a name for this. Anyway, apparently it's epidemic among the Republicans. They just can't stop doing it. The latest is from Georgia, neighbor to Alabama. I have this news parked in Pocket, and my brother Mark sent it along to me as well this morning. So everybody's clamoring for this, for the attention on it. Republican official who claimed the 2020 election was stolen. Now there's a direct line in all this. Voted illegally 9 times, the judge says, and he says it just like that in Ed Rooney's voice. 9 times. It's Brian Pritchard, the state Gop's first vice chairman. Well, he says he didn't realize he was still serving probation when he voted 9 times. It wasn't that he voted 9 times in the same election, though that sounds pretty good too. But that 9 times he voted when he should have been ineligible to vote because he was serving probation. And what in the hell is he doing as a Republican official while serving probation? And the answer is it's a prerequisite. You have to be a criminal to be a leader in the Republican Party. Clarissa Jan Lim has written this for MSNBC. A judge found, because it was sitting right in front of him, presented to him as evidence, that a Georgia Gop official and conservative talk show host, of course, who claimed that the 2020 election was stolen repeatedly, committed voter fraud himself. He said that it was stolen repeatedly, and he repeatedly committed the voter fraud. What do you know? Georgia Administrative Law Judge Lisa Boggs ruled Wednesday that Brian Pritchard, the first vice chairman of Georgia's Republican Party, violated state election law after voting unlawfully 9 times from 2008 to 2010 while on probation for a felony sentence. Okay, so that was a long time ago. I was going to say, why didn't Brian Kemp catch him? Was he Secretary of State at the time? I don't know how long he served as Secretary of State, but we got to look that up now. He's governor now, but Brian Kemp, let's look at your Wikipedia profile. Was he Secretary of State from 2008 to 2010? Maybe he did catch him, and that's why he's in trouble. And I don't know. He's in office as Secretary of State from January 8th, 2010 forward to 2018, preceded by one Karen Handel, whose name rings a bell, by the way. Why is that? Well, let's see. Oh, well, she was a member of was a member of the House of Representatives for Georgia's 6th District from June of 2017 through January 3rd, 2019. So I guess must have picked up a special election to fill Tom Price's seat when he went into the Trump administration. She was succeeded by Lucy McBath, so that was a good move. But I guess Karen Handel also at some point was Secretary of State of Georgia from January of 2007 through January 8th, 2010. So she was Secretary of State who presumably didn't catch Brian Pritchard while he was illegally voting. Or maybe she did and it just took this long to process the whole thing. All right, back to the story. Maybe that unravels itself in here. Boggs, the administrative law judge, fined him $5,000. That's $500 for each illegal vote and an additional $500 for unlawful voter registration, and said he must receive a public reprimand from the Georgia Election Board. So it's a pretty small fine, quite honestly. And then, of course, the slap on the wrist from some board or another. Pritchard was sentenced to 3 years of probation. Why? On felony forgery charges in Pennsylvania, interestingly enough, in 1996. What's he doing in Georgia at this point? His probation was revoked in 1999 after he moved to Georgia. Well, his probation was revoked? So, what do you mean? They didn't suspend his probation when he moved to Georgia. What do you mean revoked? Shouldn't he have been in jail then? I don't understand this exactly, but his probation was revoked in 1999 after he moved to Georgia. Then in 2002 and 2004, but it was ultimately extended through 2011, the Washington Post reported. We're going to have to read that story and make some sense. What do you mean? You mean if you're on probation in Pennsylvania for forgery charges and you say, well, I'm moving to Georgia. First of all, do they let you? Second of all, they then say, never mind your probation? Or are they saying, when they say revoked, is that just the wrong word? Do they mean actually, no, you're still on probation? It's extended? Or are they, I don't know. I don't understand what's going on here. But anyway, he's a criminal recidivist, as it turns out. And he moved to Georgia to commit more crime. And so he did. People on probation for felony convictions can vote in Pennsylvania, but not in Georgia. Should have stayed in Pennsylvania, man. Pritchard testified in February that he thought his probation ended in 1999, like the party, and thus did not realize he was voting illegally. I felt it ended. Well, it's how you identify. I understand. I felt it ended, he said, after a hearing, according to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Do you think the first time I voted, I said, oh, I got away with it, let me do it 8 more times? Yes, I do think that about you, absolutely. It's weird that you think I don't think the worst of you, but, that's the situation. You're in court. You kind of, that's what people are going to assume. You're going to have to prove otherwise. And I guess he didn't do it to the satisfaction of the judge anyway. And by the way, and now I'm curious about, what did Pennsylvania do? His probation was revoked after he moved to Georgia. Did they send him a letter of some kind? It probably didn't say, screw the judicial system. You're off the hook by leaving the state. I can't believe that would be. Who knows? Let's see. Oh, by the way, Murdery Trader Green makes an appearance in this story. Let's see what happens. Why? State attorneys disputed that he did not know that what he was doing, citing records of his court appearances for probation revocation hearings, which I really want to read about this. Representative Murdery Trader Green, an avid 2020 election denier herself, on Thursday called for Pritchard's resignation from his state GOP position. How do you like that? In a post on Twitter, that's the real name of the social media site, she wrote that it is, quote, unacceptable for our party to have a man in leadership who has repeatedly committed voter fraud himself, except it's perfectly fitting. Pritchard has railed against the 2020 election results on his talk show, repeatedly alleged that the election was stolen from Trump. He's expressed his dismay at the case against him when there's real voter fraud out there. Not my fake stuff. And real things that need to be investigated, including him. Allegations about voting illegally emerged in late 2022 when he was running for a Georgia state House seat. At that time, he accused media outlets reporting on the case of attempting to manipulate the race, writing on his conservative news site, which he also maintains. I got to start doing, 50 different channels here, like these guys. Yes, something happened in Pennsylvania that is of public record, but the Georgia Secretary of State, well, he said Secretary of States, wants you to believe that I knowingly voted while serving on a felony sentence. Never happened. I did vote every time they said, but never illegally. Actually, always illegally. Whoops. All right. You just didn't think it should be illegal, or, giving you the benefit of the doubt. You really didn't believe it was illegal. But so what? That's never been an excuse for anything, and you know it. Pritchard inadvertently made an essential point there about voting rights for people convicted of felonies. Whether or not he knowingly voted while serving probation, it is still against Georgia law for him to do so. Georgia is one of several states that only allows people with felony convictions to vote after completing their prison sentence, probation, or parole. Voting rights advocates have said that such restrictive laws disenfranchise millions of people. Meanwhile, Pritchard's fellow Republicans have largely opposed restoring voting rights for people with felony convictions. And that's another important point there. Yeah, look, honestly, I think you should have your voting rights restored. But this is your doing, your position as Republican in Georgia. You guys say no to that because you think it'll only affect, blah people. As one of your famous brethren from Pennsylvania once said. But then it caught you. And ha-ha. So screw you all the way to hell. Thanks very much. Interesting. So now I'm kind of curious about the Washington Post story about it. I didn't mean to spend this much time on this one either, but you know what? I mean, I'll send you the article. I'll put it in my email to Scott, and we can include it in the roundup. You and I both probably are interested in settling this and figuring out more about it, but we'll figure it out off the air. There's more important things to spend some time on. If I get in a pinch somewhere, we can turn around and go back to this. I'd like to have some explanation of exactly what do you mean with this parole revocation thing, or probation revocation. That's a weird word for it. All right, let's see. Speaking of Pennsylvania, why don't we stick on that one? There was a big Third Circuit court opinion issued the other day, which was a little bit confusing as well, but the upshot of it is described here by Kate Riga at the Talking Points memo site. And she has it put this way. The RNC gets a win in an effort to toss what are disproportionately Democratic mailed ballots in Pennsylvania. And of course, Pennsylvania and its mail-in ballot law, a key focal point for liars about the outcome of the 2020 election, or liars about the idea that it was stolen. And they keep focusing in on Pennsylvania. And so this is a frustrating and annoying win, but a win nonetheless. Kate describes it this way. A Third Circuit Court of Appeals panel ruled on Wednesday that Pennsylvania can disregard mailed ballots that were received in time for the election, but that lack a date or list an incorrect date on the outer envelope, not on the ballot, not on the inner envelope surrounding the ballot, but on the outer envelope surrounding the ballot, despite all parties agreeing that election offices don't actually use that handwritten date for any purpose other than to disqualify the thing, right? It doesn't definitively establish that something has been mailed on time, received on time, nothing. It's just a requirement. It's listed in the requirements. You must write the date here. If you don't write the date there, they can still tell whether your ballot was mailed in time. They can still tell whether your vote was validly cast, but you didn't do this thing. I mean, if it's said in the list, also stand on your head, and you don't stand on your head, your vote doesn't count. That's the basics of it. The 2-1 majority overturned a lower court which had ruled, I think more sensibly, that federal law prohibits a state from erecting immaterial roadblocks such as this to voting. All 3 judges on the Third Circuit panel were appointed by Democratic presidents, though. So don't look for Trump's appointees to have done this thing. This is Democratic appointees saying, well, the law says what it says. And it does say what it says. And they might be stuck with that. And I can kind of appreciate that. But it's also worth noting that, if there were a fair-ish Supreme Court here, you might have a chance to come and say, all right, the law says what it says, but you in the Supreme Court, you're the ones that are empowered to say things like, it says what it says, but there's no goddamn reason for it, so we don't think it should say that. We think that it's more important that people be able to cast their vote and be counted than that they jump through hoops. And so we're going to invalidate this. But the Third Circuit might not feel that they have that power. It makes a certain amount of sense, but overall, no, it doesn't make a great deal of sense. And it is interesting in comparison to what we just heard from the Supreme Court about the 14th Amendment case and the patchwork and the this and the that. We can't have states doing this. In this one, the Third Circuit says, well, the lower court rather had said federal law prohibits the state from erecting immaterial roadblocks. Now, it's not an immaterial roadblock to say, well, that guy is a insurrectionist and shouldn't be on the ballot. But it's interesting. I mean, I guess maybe it isn't. Maybe it's consistent with that. We can't have states erecting material roadblocks, like saying that your preferred candidate can't be on the ballot because he is an insurrectionist. And consistent with that, the Third Circuit also says, well, we also can't. If you can't have material ones, you probably also can't have immaterial ones. Anyway, that wasn't the Third Circuit. That was the lower court that said that. But that's why it's interesting. The Third Circuit says, yes, you can have immaterial roadblocks. Let's do it. The Republican National Committee and other Republican organizations secured a ruling from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court just before the 2022 midterms asserting that county boards of election must disregard ballots in envelopes that are incorrectly dated or that do not include a date. As a result, per Wednesday's dissent, 10,000 timely received ballots cast in the midterms were not counted. All right, so you understand the dynamics in that one. Pennsylvania Supreme Court, just before the 2022 midterms, said that county boards of election must disregard ballots in envelopes that are incorrectly dated or not dated at all. And so 10,000 people did not have their otherwise validly cast and arrived on time, sent on time ballots counted. That's pretty weird. It disenfranchises 10,000 people, apparently disproportionately Democrats at that. So very interesting. The state Supreme Court made its unanimous ruling under state law, but was evenly split on whether tossing the ballots violates federal materiality provisions of the Civil Rights Act, meant to prohibit states from using trivial mistakes to disqualify people from voting. That sounds like what this is. States had historically used such mistakes as a pretext to bar, let's say black voters from the polls. 5 Pennsylvanians whose votes were not counted in the midterms, backed by voting rights groups, brought the federal case that the panel ruled on Wednesday, arguing that the date requirement violated both the materiality provision and the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Hey, what an amendment that is. How interesting. The RNC intervened, joining state election officials as defendants. Judge Thomas Ambrose, a Clanton appointee, wrote for the Third Circuit majority that the materiality provision only covers whether someone is qualified to vote. That's an important distinction, and cannot preempt state rules relating to casting a ballot. In a myopically textualist reading, Ambrose insisted that the materiality provision is limited, despite the intent of the law being to sweep away facially neutral bars to voting. Indeed, as the dissent cites, disqualification on such basis continues to disproportionately disenfranchise voters of color in Pennsylvania to the present day. Adding a layer of surrealism to the ruling, Ambrose made plain that the majority finds that the handwritten date requirement, which is not used at all to determine a ballot's validity, they found it pointless, but maintains that the thousands of ballots that will inevitably lack or have the wrong date on it should be thrown out anyway. Pennsylvania's date requirement, regardless of what we may think of it, does not cross over to a determination of who is qualified to vote. And the materiality provision likewise does not cross over to how a state regulates its vote casting process, he wrote. That is pretty narrow. The ballots disqualified due to incorrect dates in the 2022 midterm were disproportionately Democratic, and Democrats continue to use mail-in voting more than Republicans in the state. A partisan divide, by the way, in voting habits intensified by Donald Trump's persistent and baseless demonizing of mail-in voting as unsafe. The partisan layer explains why the RNC, the National Republican Congressional Committee, and Republican Party of Pennsylvania all intervened to argue for upholding the date requirement. They saw that in this case, more Democrats are doing this than Republicans, and so we are against this. Not because it makes any sense, not because it's good policy, but because there's a partisan advantage to it. Judge Patty Schwartz, an Obama appointee, wrote in dissent that the materiality provision is much broader than the majority's read and intended to cover stages of the voting process beyond just registration. Right? That's what's so interesting about it. These other judges said, all right, well, you can't have a stupid barrier prevent people from being eligible to vote. But once they're eligible to vote, you can have stupid barriers prevent officials from counting their votes. Yeah, that's not really in keeping with the spirit. That's true. In a same-day registration jurisdiction, a voter could make a paperwork mistake on the registration form that the materiality provision would forgive. Judge Schwartz provided as an example. If, however, moments later, the voter made the identical mistake on another document requisite to voting, then under the majority's view, the materiality provision would not apply and the ballot would be discarded. Such an outcome would be inconsistent with the plain meaning of the materiality provision and Congress's goals in enacting it. She also faulted the majority for denying the intent of the provision. It is illogical to conclude that Congress, who was seeking to ensure that black Americans could vote, intended to enact legislation that only allowed black Americans to register to vote, but gave no regard to whether those same individuals could actually have their votes counted once registered, she added. So in other words, yeah, good point, right? Can you really sit there and say, well, the whole point of the civil rights movement was to allow black Americans to register to vote. After that, it's fine for racists to kick the living crap out of them if they come to actually cast a ballot. Point is, you're registered. Can you vote? Hell no, we'll break your head open. Oh, well, but isn't that a violation of all of the Civil Rights Act? Well, as it turns out, in reality, they say, well, yeah, you really can't do that. But that's exactly what they're saying, except for the head cracking part, right? But they're saying you can't have a stupid thing like a mistake of the date prevent you from getting registered to vote, but you can have the same stupid thing prevent you from having your ballot count. And what point is there in being registered to vote if they can invalidate your ballot with stupid crap every time? Well, they might not do it every time. You might get the date right next time. You might, Rabbit. You might. But I think Judge Schwartz has the better point here. The majority sent the case back down for the plaintiffs to argue under their equal protection challenge. They still have a chance here, which election law scholar Rick Hasen wrote may be a tough claim to make. The case will eventually reach the Supreme Court, likely, and could affect the 2024 election. No, it won't, because it won't be heard and resolved until then, because the courts are dragging their feet to avoid doing things like this. That's another story that's out there. President Joe Biden won the Commonwealth, that's Pennsylvania, by about 80,000 votes in 2020. Trump won it by about 44,000 in 2016. For down ballot races, those margins are often tighter. One can only hope that election officials do not capitalize on the majority's narrow interpretation of the materiality provision by enacting unduly technical and immaterial post-registration paperwork requirements. It could silence the voices of qualified voters, Schwartz concluded ominously. The ruling is included for your perusal at that point, but it's a little longer than anything we will endeavor to read on the air. But yeah, important case, something to watch. And I mentioned the other day on their way out, I didn't get to sneak it in, but when we were talking about Ronna McDaniel and her hiring and subsequent firing or release, I guess, by NBC, I mentioned to you that Adam Bonin had made a very interesting point about it, and that she had, I guess, in her appearance on Meet the Press, as Adam says, voiced one of the dumbest arguments regarding 2020, which she denies the outcome of, that her claim, and this is something that's behind this case here, that mail-in ballots skyrocketed in Pennsylvania between 2016 and 2020. That was one of her things. She says, when you see that many new mail-in ballots, she says that's an evidence of fraud. We'll tell you, of course, how that happened after this. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. I just want to let you know that, as I mentioned, there was this excuse that Ronna McDaniel gave while she was on Meet the Press. She was asked by Kristen Welker if she is still giving credence to these allegations of fraud in the 2020 election, and she hedged a little bit, but basically says when you have states like Pennsylvania go from 260,000 mail-in ballots in 2016 to 2.6 million, saying, you know what, when you get rid of ID for all mail-in ballots, that's a concern. We should all be concerned about the care, custody, integrity of every ballot except these 10,000. That's all I'm saying. And you know what? This is the viewpoint of a lot of Republicans, and they think Joe Biden's the president, but they also think there were problems, and both can be true. In other words, she's saying, it's not that I'm denying the outcome of the election. It's just that I'm saying that, we're stuck with Joe Biden. That's the conclusion. But if we had interpreted things correctly, he might not have been the president. And we didn't interpret things correctly. And the whole crime is in 2016, there were 260,000 mail-in ballots. In 2020, it's interesting that she doesn't say 2020, but she says, you go from 260,000 mail-in ballots in 2016 to 2.6 million. That is reason for concern in her view. I guess 10 times more mail-in ballots in the next election, which, by the way, wink, wink, was 2020, which, by the way, wink, wink, was the pandemic year, for one thing, where lots of people everywhere and all over the country were voting by mail because it was goddamn dangerous to go out and stand in a line with everybody else and spread COVID around. But on top of that, Adam lets us know, never forget, he says that Ronna McDaniel used her Meet the Press appearance to voice one of the dumbest arguments regarding 2020, that mail-in ballots skyrocketed in Pennsylvania between 2016 and 2020. Now, not only was COVID in part to blame for that, if blame is the right word, and it isn't, but remember that this was possible because Republicans in the state legislature changed Pennsylvania law in 2019, before the pandemic, before we had any inkling that that was coming, to enable what they call no excuse mail-in voting. Anybody who wants to can vote by mail. Lo and behold, more people decided, hey, I'll vote by mail rather than going and standing in line endlessly for hours in some places to cast my ballot. Much more convenient to do it by mail. Thank you, somehow, Republican legislators. And remember, this was done in 2019 before Republicans decided that mail-in balloting was somehow fraudulent. And when it was their mostly elderly voters who were taking advantage of it, they thought they were giving themselves a partisan leg up, so they did it. Then they found out, oh, I don't know, our idiot president says somehow this is giving Democrats a leg up, which it isn't, but now we oppose it. But too late, there's a pandemic, and everybody suddenly realizes, hey, this is actually a pretty good idea. So between pandemic and Republicans saying this is fine, go ahead and do it, 10 times more people than in 2016 opted to do it in 2020 for very good reasons and with the permission of Republicans. And now, boo-hoo, you lost. She's on the air saying, you know, that's highly suspect. Who did it? We did. Yeah, well, go F yourself then. Thank you very much. But that never made it on the air. I'm not really certain why that didn't happen. Okay, so there you go. That's an important story to watch. There are others. Who wants to know about what some of these other stupid things are? All right, let's see. The New Republic had a piece that bears on our discussion from yesterday with respect to Jeffrey Clark and his disbarment proceedings. Who's written this here? Ellie Quinlan, Houtailing? I don't know. Houghthaling. I'm really sorry, Ellie, but I did my best for you. Here's the take she's got on Clark's disbarment proceedings. Jeffrey Clark screws over Donald Trump big time in the 2020 election case. This is interesting and came to my attention. Who put this one out there? Quinta Jurachik? Maybe Jurachik. How does she pronounce her name? Oh, well, anyway, I've made more problems for myself. But pointing out something that, this from Jeffrey Clark's hearing, but actually, yeah, Quinta was talking about something from Eastman's hearing, which is different. But note to self, I'll turn to that later. So how did this come to my attention? I don't know, but I like the headline. What's going on? Jeffrey Clark screws over Donald Trump big time in 2020 election case. The former Justice Department official who helped Trump with his efforts to overthrow the 2020 election just gave a damning testimony in court. Well, all right, let's hear it. And then I'll remind myself, oh yeah, I heard this yesterday when I put it in pocket. I've forgotten. My mind is a blank as to what's in this now. Former Justice Department official Jeffrey Clark made a major slip-up on Wednesday, admitting during a disciplinary hearing to save his law license that he had one client in mind while dodging questions on the basis of attorney-client privilege, former President Donald Trump. Okay. This is what I had in mind. I thought this was an Eastman thing, but apparently it was not. It was a Clark thing, and this is what Quinta was talking about. So, okay. I don't know why I confused it with Eastman, but I did. And did I do that on? Did we discuss it on social media? I was talking about this and pointing to it for others to review as well. But now I want to scroll back and see what it was that I had said. Oh, yeah. No, that was Eastman. Yeah, I said it was Eastman, but it was in fact Clark when I had this in mind. But I'm sure they think the same thing, but only Clark apparently was stupid enough to make this mistake. All right, let's see. So the story goes like this. Former Justice Department official Clark made a major slip-up on Wednesday, admitting during the disciplinary hearing that he had one client in mind, former President Donald Trump. Mr. Clark, you asserted a number of times attorney-client privilege, prompted a committeewoman for the D.C. Bar, Patricia Matthews. For whom were you the attorney? And remember, I guess maybe I thought this was Eastman, because Eastman was at least, not a member of government at the time, not employed by the government. So he may have come to the conclusion that he was somehow in private practice on behalf of Donald Trump personally, maybe. Or perhaps that he had somehow been contracted by what would presumably be the federal government if you were brought in to defend the office that Trump occupied, the presidency. But this is odd for a DOJ official to think my client is Donald Trump. The man and the office is difficult to reconcile. But here's the thing. So he's saying, I'm not going to answer your questions based on attorney-client privilege. And remember, his whole thing was, sure, I planned this whole thing that ended up leading to insurrection. But, for instance, I don't think I should be charged for proposing that we send the letter to Georgia saying that their legislature should convene and appoint new electors based on my weird-ass theory. I never sent it. So no harm, no foul. This is just deliberative privilege or attorney-client privilege. I proposed a certain thing to my client and they declined to act on it. But that's just me giving zealous legal representation. And that's privileged. Well, okay, if you're asserting an attorney-client privilege, they asked him, who's your client? Because you're working for DOJ, your client is supposed to be the United States, possibly the executive branch, possibly. But even so, then, you have an obligation to make sure that the law is being faithfully executed. And here you are not doing that. But for whom were you the attorney? And the answer, for President Trump, the head of the executive branch, the sole head, the unitary head of Article 2, the executive branch of the United States government, Clark replied. It's a better answer for Clark to give, a DOJ official, than for Eastman. I thought Eastman gave this answer, and that was insane. But this is only slightly less insane. That was, however, more than Clark's attorney expected him to share, thereafter urging his client to plead the fifth in an attempt to avoid incriminating himself further. I would respectfully request my client to invoke questions about the basis for attorney-client privilege because those answers would be intimidating to them as well, said Harry McDougald, Clark's attorney. So respectfully, I would ask him to invoke. That was a confusing way of saying it, but please don't say anything like that again, sir. But the singular defense only made Clark more combative as the hearing went on, which is not great when they have your law license in their hands, but he's a very dumb guy. At one point, he accused the hearing's lead investigator, Hamilton Fox, of attempting to humiliate him, reported Politico. Well, I'm not attempting to, but it is happening. It's actually your doing. Clark stands accused of attempting to engage in dishonest conduct on behalf of Trump in the aftermath of the 2020 presidential election. That included Clark's suggestion to send a letter to Georgia officials underlining a DOJ investigation into the voting process in the state and suggesting that they should void President Joe Biden's win. Clark also held multiple meetings with Trump that violated proper DOJ procedure, actions that the lead investigator described on Tuesday as essentially a coup attempt at the Department of Justice. Remember yesterday we were discussing how there were two coup-related activities underway. One to overthrow the government of the United States, and the other to overthrow the leadership of the Department of Justice. Clark is charged alongside Trump, Giuliani, and more than a dozen others in an alleged racketeering conspiracy to overturn the 2020 election results in Georgia. He's also been identified but not charged by federal prosecutors in Trump's D.C. trial as part of a larger scheme to help Trump retain power. So, yes, it would have been that much crazier to hear, perhaps, from Eastman, or more incriminating, perhaps, to hear from Eastman, but actually a totally different kind of incriminating for Clark to say that my client was President Trump. I guess he tried to bail himself out by saying, well, I mean, the executive branch was my client. Nah. It's interesting because, of course, the executive branch, well, I mean, his invoking unitary executive theory. The only one person can embody the executive branch, and I understand that argument. But the rest of the entirety of the executive branch was saying, no, the election's over. The votes have been cast. There's no role for the executive branch in the counting of electoral votes. So, butt out. And butt out the rest of the executive branch did, but not him and not the unitary head of the executive branch. So, I don't know. To the extent that he's got an obligation to see that the law be faithfully executed, he seems to have failed in that endeavor. Anyway, I thought that was very interesting, and that'll have some complications for him and for Trump when it comes time for trial. I mentioned that there was foot dragging out there afoot. There's foot dragging afoot. Foot dragging is always going to be afoot, I guess, at some level. But here in the Supreme Court, horror of horrors, I can't believe it, but they're actually using their scheduling foot dragging to continue to give Republicans an illegal leg up in federal elections. It's just so strange. It's such a patchwork that they're creating out there. The news reported by Patrick Marley in the Washington Post that South Carolina is the latest state to use a congressional map that has been deemed illegal. You're going to be voting in South Carolina in 2024 based on maps that are illegal and unconstitutional, but that courts say we just can't do anything about it because, gosh, it's too dang close to the election to actually take care of this, 6 months out. The Supreme Court heard arguments on the redistricting case in October, but has yet to rule, essentially running out the clock for this year's election. Why? It's only March and the election's in November. Well, that's close enough. I told you what year it was, right? 2024. We can't have this happening in an election year, just like we can't be approving any Supreme Court nominations in an election year. They got some pretty weird ideas about election years in the Republican Party. In a scenario that has played out in 3 states in recent years, a federal court ruled Thursday that time had run out to draw a new congressional district in South Carolina, and the state would have to proceed this fall with an existing election map that the court had previously deemed illegal. It's effing illegal, but what can I tell you? Go commit this crime, everybody. You have our permission. The ruling echoes redistricting cases in other southern states. I can't believe this keeps happening over and over, where courts found that congressional maps violated the voting rights of black voters and other people of color, but allowed them to be used anyway, at least temporarily, several times in a row. In recent years, it's happened in Alabama, Georgia, and Louisiana. But racism's over, so don't worry about it. In the latest instance, a panel of 3 judges decided to let South Carolina use a map drawn by the Republican-led legislature there because the Supreme Court had not yet decided an appeal that will ultimately determine how the district should be drawn. Voting rights advocates decried the ruling, saying it is unjust to hold even one election in districts that are unconstitutional. Once an election happens, you kind of can't get back that election, said Leah Aden, the senior counsel for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, which brought the South Carolina lawsuit. The ruling came a day after a different federal court upheld a congressional map in Florida that favors Republicans and erases a seat held by a black Democrat. Those decisions, along with others in recent months, mean the congressional maps for 2024 are largely set. Republicans narrowly control the House, and voters this fall will decide whether to let them keep it. Also on Thursday, a federal appeals court issued a ruling that all but ensures that North Carolina will use state legislative maps this fall that Democrats and voting rights advocates say dilute black representation in the state house. Michael Lee, L.I. Lee, senior counsel for the Brennan Center's Democracy Program, said appeals take so long that states sometimes get a chance to use illegal maps for 1 or even 2 election cycles before they are forced to draw new ones. What could I do? Well, 2 Congresses were completely controlled by illegal maps, but you caught us. Maybe we'll get around to it next time. Let's see. What do you want us to do? Oh, my goodness, we ran out of time again. We're going to do 3 elections with these maps. There's only 5 that normally get done because they are supposed to redraw these things every 10 years anyway. It's becoming more common, Lee said. Courts used to go out of their way to have voters not vote on a map that had been deemed illegal. Now, unless you get everything resolved, you have to vote on a map that is illegal. The courts can undermine voters' rights through the process. Last year, a panel of 3 judges concluded that South Carolina's Republican-led legislature exiled 30,000 black voters from the state's 1st congressional district to make it safer for a white Gop incumbent. You'll never guess who. It's everybody's favorite moderate, Representative Nancy Mace. South Carolina appealed, and both sides asked the Supreme Court to expedite the case to ensure a final ruling was in place well ahead of the election season. And yet, the justices heard arguments in October but have yet to rule. Weird. At the time, the majority of justices signaled that they were inclined to allow the state to use the boundaries drawn by lawmakers. With no decision and the June 11th primary on the horizon, South Carolina sought permission to use the map this year, even though it had been deemed unconstitutional. You know, it's okay to impose unconstitutional conditions on black voters. We found that out. They just told us that in Pennsylvania earlier in the show. The panel of judges unanimously agreed Thursday to keep the map in place for this election. It noted that courts typically don't allow maps to be used once they've been found to be invalid. Yeah, you would think that would be the law, but with the primary election procedures rapidly approaching, the appeal before the Supreme Court still pending, and no remedial plan in place, and who has an incentive to draw that? Nobody. The ideal must bend to the practical, the judges wrote. You know, like when we require that a date that isn't used for anything be written on an envelope, lest the otherwise totally valid ballot inside be thrown out. We need to bend to the practical. Wait a minute. But in this case, bending to the practical would allow black people to vote. Oh, well then do not bend to the practical. The end. If the Supreme Court reverses the lower court ruling later this year, the district will remain as it is through 2030. If it upholds the lower court ruling, new maps will have to be drawn for the 2026 election. Last year, the Supreme Court upheld a decision that found Alabama had violated the Voting Rights Act and had to draw a new district. Voting rights advocates hailed the decision but expressed frustration over how long the case took, noting that the Supreme Court had allowed the 2022 elections to occur using district lines that a court had deemed illegal. And then you may recall, even after that, Alabama said, go F yourself once or twice before, I guess, finally being forced into a corner and forced to draw a new map. But the game essentially is this. You can very purposefully and very pointedly draw maps that you know will be held unconstitutional, but they're not going to be able to hold them unconstitutional before I run 1 and maybe even 2 elections on them. And why not give that a shot? It's 4 years when we can legislate with a majority we're not entitled to. And maybe even more, since afterwards, all right, fine, we'll redraw the districts. But now an incumbent with name recognition is running to seek re-election. Yes, in a different district. Yes, they can boot him out. But he is running as a 4-year incumbent with all of the name recognition and fundraising advantage built right in. Built in illegally, built in unconstitutionally, but built in nonetheless. And it's okay with us, because reasons. Anyway, being timed out is very disappointing for any voting rights plaintiffs, said Abba Kana, or Kana perhaps, an attorney who won the Alabama case. But the light at the end of the tunnel is that there's always another election, and it's usually not far away. And you just have to live with the consequences of stuff like, losing your social safety net along the way. Joshua Douglas, a University of Kentucky law professor, said the South Carolina case tracked the Alabama case as well as ones in Georgia and Louisiana. This shows how states have successfully run out the clock in election years, allowing them to use maps that the courts have found illegal. They're illegal, you can't use them. Well, yes, you can. Last year, the panel, which consists of 2 judges nominated by President Barack Obama and 1 by President Biden, found the map illegally split neighborhoods in the Charleston area to make Mace's race easier. The new lines constituted a racial gerrymander that exiled over 30,000 African American citizens from their previous district, the panel found. But on Thursday, with no decision from the Supreme Court, the panel determined that it had to allow the map to be used this fall because there's little time left. Primary ballots must be sent to military, and overseas ballots also need to be sent by April 27th under federal law, the judges noted. The district court had no choice, said Richard Hasen. We hear from him all the time, UCLA law professor and director of the Safeguarding Democracy Project. So I really think the fault here lies with the U.S. Supreme Court. So what are you going to do? Nothing to be done. The Supreme Court has been handling cases more slowly of late when they want to. At this point in the 2005 term, the court had decided more than half of the cases in which it heard oral arguments, according to Empirical SCOTUS, a website which tracks court cases. This term, the court has decided just 22% of such cases. In arguments before the Supreme Court in October, attorneys for South Carolina argued that the state lawmakers had not relied on race to draw maps in violation of the Constitution. Just accidentally did it, I guess. Rather, they used political information to help them decide where to place the lines, they said, which should really be no better. But it wouldn't violate necessarily the Civil Rights Act, but it should violate our idea of how to hold fair elections in this country. But it doesn't. So there you go. That's another important development. Also much discussed. Let's see. If we get into that, then we definitely won't have time before the break. But we could maybe shoehorn this in after the break, a big story. In the meantime, maybe we'll read this piece, this press release from Ron Wyden, who I mentioned the other day is on the Paul Manafort trail. This is his regular press release from his Capitol Hill office. Wyden requests DNI Haynes, Director of National Intelligence Haynes, declassify information related to Paul Manafort's relationship with Russian government operatives. There's a subheader here, but it's barely perceptibly different in type size. Interesting. Wyden renews 2020 request to make public information from Senate Intelligence Committee report on Russian interference in the 2016 election to benefit Donald Trump. They could work on their headline writing over there. But the release says U.S. Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat of Oregon, in case you forgot, today called on the Biden administration to declassify information concerning Paul Manafort's involvement with Russian government operatives following news reports that Manafort may soon join Donald Trump's 2024, we'll say, presidential campaign, turpitudinous though it may be. Manafort served as Trump's campaign chairman for portions of the 2016 presidential campaign. He later was convicted of multiple crimes, including tax and bank fraud related to his work for a Ukrainian oligarch allied with Russian President Vladimir Putin and tampering with witnesses. The public version of the bipartisan Senate Intelligence Committee report on Russian active measures, campaigns, and interference in the 2016 U.S. election, that's a long title, identified Manafort as a conduit for connections between the Trump campaign and Russia. The committee found that Manafort's presence in the 2016 campaign and proximity to Trump created opportunities for Russian intelligence services to exert influence over and acquire confidential information on the Trump campaign. Taken as a whole, Manafort's high-level access and willingness to share information with individuals closely affiliated with the Russian intelligence services, particularly Konstantin Kilimnik and associates of Oleg Deripaska, represented a grave counterintelligence threat. However, as Wyden pointed out in his additional views to the report at the time, important details concerning Manafort's interactions with Konstantin Kilimnik and Oleg Deripaska, both closely linked to the Russian security services, were redacted and kept from the public. It is critical that these details be made public to the greatest extent possible, Wyden wrote to Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines. As the committee recommended, The public should be informed as soon as a foreign influence campaign is detected. In this case, a known grave counterintelligence threat is reportedly joining a presidential campaign. Only by understanding the details of that threat can the public guard against a malign foreign influence effort that could once again threaten an American election. So how do you like that? You have the obligation, or the opportunity, should we really call it an obligation? I don't think so. To read the entire letter sent to DNI Haynes in a link that follows. It's only a one-pager, although they just missed making it one page. The signature exists alone on page 2. If you're interested, I say click through. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So if you're interested in reading the entire letter, by all means go ahead and do so. But I think the chief points, I mean, this was Wyden's own press release. I think he probably extracted the main points that he wanted you to take away with it. So probably unnecessary. And time now for us to turn to some of the other items. Well, one in particular we were holding for after the break. The latest New York Times piece on Justice Thomas and the various ways in which he continues to thumb his nose at all otherwise generally accepted legal and ethical responsibilities for Supreme Court justices. Here's the newest one, and I think we already knew about this one. I don't know what the new news hook is on this one. I think we discussed it when I first heard it. I feel like we've heard it, but let's see what it is that brings it back into the news now. How Justice Thomas's, quote, nearly adopted daughter, whatever that means, became his law clerk. What do you know about that? Interesting. Justice Clarence Thomas gave one Crystal Clanton a home and a job after she left a conservative youth organization in controversy. Then the justice picked her for one of the most coveted positions in the legal world. That's the long and short of it. Steve Eder, E-D-E-R, and Abby Van Sickle are the reporters on this March 28th piece. The email went out to members of Justice Clarence Thomas's Law Clerk Network late last month, celebrating his newest addition to an exclusive club. The justice's selection needed no introduction, though. They had the word though on that one. Crystal Clanton's clerkship for OT24, October term. OT24 was announced by Scalia Law today, wrote an assistant to Virginia Thomas, the justice's wife, who's known as Ginni. Now, again, I got to stop things here and just say, one, the clerkship was announced by Scalia Law, although presumably it was also announced by Thomas's office. But then it's interesting that they point to the Scalia Law announcement. Why do they point to the Scalia Law announcement? Probably a couple of reasons. But one is that this is an email going out to the network of former Clarence Thomas clerks. Who's sending it? Clarence Thomas? No. A clerk of Clarence Thomas? No. Ginni Thomas, or at least Ginni Thomas's office. And in fact, she has an assistant do this work for her. But what is Justice Thomas's wife doing emailing the network of Thomas clerks? Unless it's for Justice Thomas's birthday is coming and I'm holding a party and you're all invited. What is the issue here? Why are you contacting all of us? And what is it to announce? By the way, it's to announce that someone else has announced that Crystal Clanton is going to get a clerkship. And wow, what a surprise. This is an amazing thing. She won the merit competition against everybody and beat them in, moot court competition, or wrote the best article for a law. No, she just is one of ours. You see, this is interesting. So the story continues. The email referred to the 2024 October term of the court, and the tone was jubilant. Please take a look at these posts of congratulations and support. Consider reposting, replying, or adding your own. It's just a weird request in general. The Thomases and Ms. Clanton, a 29-year-old conservative organizer turned lawyer, have built such a close relationship that the couple informally refer to her as their, quote, nearly adopted daughter. Ms. Clanton, who was previously accused of sending racist text messages, including one that read, quote, and all caps, I hate black people, has lived in the Thomas home, assisted Ms. Thomas in her political consulting business, that's Ginni, and joined her in a girls' trip to New York. In 2019, at the Thomases' urging, Ms. Clanton enrolled at Antonin Scalia Law School at George Mason University in Virginia, where Justice Thomas has taught. Sort of, kind of. I mean, never mind that. I don't know whether was he ever adjunct faculty. He may have been, but he also, teaches courses for 3 days at their junkets to resort properties around the country, where they invite other federal judges to listen to Justice Thomas speak for half an hour and then watch him take off and go fishing somewhere. In 2019, at the Thomases' urging, she enrolled in Scalia Law School. She received, by the way, oddly enough, a full merit scholarship. Who knew? According to another judge who later hired her. Her upcoming Supreme Court clerkship, one of the most coveted jobs in the American legal profession, is the latest triumph in her redemption from a highly publicized 2017 controversy over the racist messages. What a comeback, huh? The blow led to her departure, or rather the blow up led to her departure from a group she helped build, Turning Point USA, which seeks to increase the influence of conservative students on college campuses across the country. That's the stated goal. For Justice Thomas's critics, his selection of Ms. Clanton as a clerk is blatant favoritism, if not nepotism, particularly for a justice already under an ethics cloud for revelations about his gifts and travel from wealthy benefactors. To his defenders, because both sides, Justice Thomas is showing admirable willingness to take in a young conservative and shield her from a firestorm of attacks for text messages that he and other supporters say were fakes designed to malign her. Because everybody needed to malign Crystal Clanton in 2017, right? You remember what you were all doing in 2017? God dang, Clanton, you've got to do something about her. I know, I'll fake some racist text message. Remember, not that you saw the report about the racist text messages and said, we got to do something about her. That might have happened. But before those text messages, weren't all good progressives walking around saying, Crystal Clanton, we got to do something about her. She's working at Turning Point USA. No one had ever heard of her. There would be no reason to do this. Either way, his decision is another example of the justice landing himself in public controversy, this time by hiring his wife's former employee and a virtual family member, primarily known outside the justice's circle, for those allegations that she had sent anti-black texts. Friends say Ms. Clanton's hiring also reflects Justice Thomas's sympathy to a young woman. Oh, I'm sorry, a young woman under siege, not just, young women for some reason. As he has been, he also under siege, right? From what he has long viewed as a sanctimonious liberal elite. We're going to replace him with a sanctimonious conservative elite. Justice Thomas knows what a racist is. Mark Paoletta, a close friend and frequent defender of the Thomases, wrote on social media, adding, "I will take his word in judgment any day of the week." Now, I will not, but Mark will. The justice, he added, has survived Democrat racists in D.C. who've attacked him for 40 years because he does not conform to their racist demand that he must think a certain way based on the color of his skin. But also, don't hire your nearly adopted daughter and your wife's cast-off employees. The Thomases and Ms. Clanton did not respond to multiple requests for comment, by the way. Ethics experts say there's nothing in the Supreme Court's new ethics code, which isn't enforceable anyway, that prohibits a justice from hiring someone accused of racism. Well, that's true, but that's not really the chief accusation here. Or even anything that prevents him from hiring a close family friend. That's more to the point, I think. Court watchers point to other recent selections of clerks, such as Justice Elena Kagan's decision to hire Attorney General Merrick Garland's daughter. Well, okay. I mean, a little less close, the relationship there, but I could see where that would upset some people. Although, as it turns out, Garland's daughter, I guess an asop to people who would criticize her, will not start work with the justice while her father is Attorney General. She's deferring the clerkship, but she's got it locked, so, that is a thing. In the early days of the Supreme Court, and this is really irrelevant at this point, in the early days of the Supreme Court, and we're talking, late 18th century, early 19th century, justices sometimes hired their sons as law clerks to assist them with cases, and law clerks often worked out of justices' homes. That is, of course, an archaic practice, now looked down upon, now frowned upon pretty, clearly, but doesn't bother Thomas. Anyway, the Federal Judicial Code of Conduct, which the Supreme Court is not bound to follow, advises judges to avoid favoritism and to exercise the power of appointment fairly and only on the basis of merit. A 2016 advisory opinion cautioned against a judge's giving the appearance that someone may gain an advantage in hiring because of the person's broader connections to a judge. It seems clear that Justice Thomas acted improperly in hiring someone to whom he is so close that he describes her as something akin to a family member, said Kathleen Clark, a legal ethics expert at Washington University in St. Louis. While this hiring probably does not violate the nepotism statutes, it is the type of favoritism prohibited by the code. Throughout his career, Justice Thomas has shown a preference for clerks who have overcome adversity, especially if he has helped them overcome adversity. He has often reached beyond Ivy League law schools and looked for evidence of grit and determination, like hanging out at my house. I like clerks from modest backgrounds, he said in a speech a decade ago. I'm from a modest background. I truly believe that they're special, because I believe I'm special, I guess. Kids who for some reason keep at it every day in spite of the odds. Get up every day. Nobody gives them a break, but they keep going. Nobody gives them things like, you just got fired from your job for being a public racist. Come live in my house and work for my wife. And then later, I'll recommend, and I don't know if it's going to help at all, but as a Supreme Court justice, I'll recommend that you be admitted to the local law school named for my Supreme Court colleague and funded by the people who send me on vacation and allow me to use their super yachts, et cetera, and pay for my kid, my great nephew, to attend private school. I'll see if they'll let you in. Oh, by the way, I'll see if they'll give you a full merit scholarship because of all the merit that you have. And then I'll give you, one of the most coveted jobs in the legal profession, clerking for a Supreme Court justice, who happens to be me. Those kids for some reason, they just keep going. They're so plucky. They just keep at it every day. I guess if you got breaks like that every day, you'd get up and keep at it too. Ms. Clanton was raised in Gurnee, Illinois, a middle-class suburb of Chicago, by her grandparents, whom she revered as role models. They're perfect examples of strength, grace, and kindness, she told the website futurefirstlady.com. Ooh, what is that? That's gross. In 2015, which highlighted her as a weekly conservative woman, not W-E-A-K, like weekly conservative. No, every week they feature another conservative woman under the guise that they're going to be future first ladies. Not future presidents, future first ladies. I mean, that's just kind of a gross framing in general. But I was kind of curious to read that profile. But later, a lesser-known part of Ms. Clanton's story is an early family tragedy. In December of 1994, a few months before she was born, Ms. Clanton's biological father, a construction worker, was acquitted by a jury on charges that he had fatally battered her 18-month-old brother, reported at the time by the Chicago Tribune. Yikes. Ms. Clanton's mother asked for a protective order against Ms. Clanton's father, and it was granted, the court documents show, when Ms. Clanton was a year old. Years later, when Ms. Clanton was 14, her grandmother wrote in a court filing that she had raised Ms. Clanton since she was 6 months old. The court records do not shed light on the role Ms. Clanton's mother played in her upbringing. Okay. Ms. Clanton was an honor roll student at her high school in Gurnee and competed in community beauty pageants and contests for future business leaders and first ladies, I guess. She was always politically inclined, but fears about President Barack Obama's election. Ooh. I didn't know that was such a serious problem for her. That nudged her toward activism. I heard my family talking about it, all the ways that Obama's policies were going to make it harder for them to get ahead, as opposed to, giving them health insurance. She said in the 2015 interview, I thought it was unfair, and I didn't like the direction Obama wanted our country to go. So I decided to do something about it. And that something was joining Turning Point USA, founded in 2012 by Charlie Kirk, a young conservative activist, now an old conservative activist, out of his parents' house in the Chicago suburbs because of how plucky and independent he was. Ms. Clanton was an active member through her college years at Marquette University in Wisconsin. She became a national field director, appeared on Fox News, made inroads at other universities, and wrote several articles for an affiliated website, including, quote, 5 Things Hillary Really Said. What an exciting topic. The rise of Donald J. Trump supercharged the group. Mr. Kirk became a political sensation as the organization attracted some of the biggest names in the conservative world. Among them was Ms. Thomas, a Turning Point Advisory Board member who, in the summer of 2016, delivered a speech to more than 400 conservative women at the group's Young Women's Leadership Summit in Dallas. It is unclear when Ms. Clanton first met Ms. Thomas, but the two likely would have crossed paths at the summit, which Ms. Clanton helped organize. And then all of a sudden she moved into their house. And weird, I just wanted to say at this point, by the way, well, I'll hold off for just a second. By then, she was on a rise of her own, her very own, Ms. Clanton had become the top lieutenant to Mr. Kirk, who in a February 2016 post on Twitter lavished her with praise. He shared a picture of a packed room of organizers and wrote, "See this? This was created thanks to," unquote, Ms. Clanton. I guess she probably just said whatever her name was, Crystal. And they substitute Ms. Clanton because it's the New York Times. And her amazing leadership. Without her, there is no TPUSA. And by the way, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? Because back then, 4 years ago, there was no TP USA. I just wanted to throw that in there. Anyway, that fall, Ms. Clanton was quoted in Time magazine, woo-wee, in an article titled "The Gop's Young Women Whisperers." That is, people who whisper to young women, I guess. But by the way, beware of Republicans who whisper to young women. They're often planning to sexually assault them, so watch out. Anyway, in the summer of 2017, though, she was gone from Turning Point. You can't do this. 2016, we can't do this without Crystal's amazing leadership. A year later, fired. Why? Good reason, apparently. A clue to her departure came in December of that year. Jane Meyer of the New Yorker reported that Ms. Clanton had sent text messages to another Turning Point employee, including the racist one, with profanity. Ms. Clanton, who would have been about 20 when the messages were sent, told the New Yorker that she did not recall the messages. Too young to remember, you see. Happened in my infancy. Mr. Kirk told the magazine that Turning Point assessed the situation and took decisive action within 72 hours of being made aware of the issue. So they seem pretty clear that they were real. Since then, Ms. Clanton has not spoken publicly on the issue, possibly because of a confidentiality agreement that she has with Turning Point. But Mr. Kirk has adjusted his account and asserted that Ms. Clanton was the victim of a former Turning Point employee who created fake text messages to smear her. What's he done about that? I don't know. Did he take decisive action within 72 hours? I don't see that he did. Mr. Kirk and Turning Point have not publicly provided evidence for that assertion, nor have they actually done anything about it. In the explosive aftermath of the text messages, Ms. Thomas told her husband of the horrible way, that's a quote, Ms. Clanton had been treated at Turning Point. Justice Thomas wrote in a 2021 letter and asked that she be allowed to live with us. Give her money, set her up with a job. No, live with us. That is unusual. The justice, who had been through his own media firestorm in his confirmation hearings when Anita Hill, a former subordinate, accused him of earlier sexual harassment, agreed to take in Ms. Clanton. And by the way, you should maybe take a peek at a photograph of Ms. Clanton, who competed in local beauty pageants in her youth, and ponder why it is that the help absolutely positively had to include moving in to live with us. No real reason given for that. And she lived with us for almost a year, he wrote. It was not easy at first. In the beginning, Ms. Clanton was understandably distraught and depressed and felt overwhelmed and was ready to give up, the justice wrote. In other words, she was, emotionally vulnerable when he invited her to live with us for a year and then lavished her with gifts and favor. All I'm saying here is there is actual, real, live, true to, honest to God grooming going on in front of everybody's face right here. And you will be hard-pressed to find a Republican. All of a sudden, you won't be able to find a Republican who cares about grooming. Isn't that weird? That's crazy. Well, anyway, as we said, it was not easy at first. She was understandably distraught and depressed, vulnerable, I would say, and felt overwhelmed and was ready to give up. It was excruciating to watch her suffer so deeply, not knowing how to erase the smear or show that her life was not over. Wait a minute, I got an idea. Let's put her in law school, get it totally paid for, and then give her one of the most prestigious jobs in law and launch a career for her while she lives here. For reasons, Reasons. That's what all I'm saying. Reasons. Well, look, she was also facing, Justice Thomas wrote, the terminal illness of her grandmother, who was not expected to live another year. And in fact, Ms. Clanton's grandmother died in April of 2018. Ms. Clanton worked for Ginni Thomas as a project manager at her political firm, Liberty Consulting. So she had landed on her feet. She had the job, but also had a house, and also a future career. She handled data, helped clients, and assisted nonprofits. At which point they decided maybe she's one of the smartest and most capable attorneys in the entire country, even though she hasn't yet gone to law school. But if she does, she totally will be. I don't know. They had a close-up view of her. I don't know. Maybe they're not wrong about that. In May of 2019, Ms. Thomas hinted at her protege's progress. She's the wind in my sails, Ms. Thomas said in a speech to the Council for National Policy, asking Ms. Clanton to stand for recognition. By then, Ms. Clanton had applied to the Scalia Law School, renamed in 2016 in honor of Justice Antonin Scalia as part of a $30 million deal with conservative donors. The school has built close ties with Supreme Court justices, including Justice Thomas, who has taught there in recent years. Ms. Clanton started at the school in the fall of 2019. It is unclear whether she was still living with the Thomases at that point, but the school was only a half hour from their home, and Ms. Clanton was as close as ever to the couple. That's odd, Just saying. I mean, I don't know why I immediately thought, oh, well, that's a sort of an odd thing. But then again, maybe it's not so odd because over at Moms for Liberty, they had a sort of weird ongoing three-way relationship thing happening. I'm not saying this happened here. I'm just saying that they really went the extra mile to decide to move her into the house. And gosh, aren't they charitable? Maybe that's all they are. Just fantastic people. I don't know. But it's still too much to then hand her free law school and a clerkship. But look, they've decided to do it. If there was also some other weird things that happened, well, then you have a case. I'd listen to it. Go ahead. They listed her on their family page in an annual printed clerk directory as their, quote, nearly adopted daughter, and featured her prominently in photos of the Thomases' annual Christmas letters. During the girls' trip to New York, who's the other girl? I don't know. Ms. Clanton joined the group at Broadway shows and in singing karaoke. I mean, it's an interesting thing to do. It's interesting that they felt the need to tell all of Justice Thomas's former clerks, there's this young woman living in our house and she's our nearly adopted daughter. Like, what? Who cares? I don't know. But apparently that was something that a network of former Thomas clerks needed to know about. In the meantime, Justice Thomas set in motion the chess moves. It's not really, okay, whatever. For a Supreme Court clerkship. There's not much chess involved in it. I'm going to make you a clerk, period, the end. That's the chess? Okay. In Ms. Clanton's second year in law school, I guess, he reached out to Judge William H. Pryor, Jr., Chief Judge of the United States Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit, based in Atlanta. Judge Pryor has sent roughly 24 law clerks to the Supreme Court, mainly to conservative justices. Justice Thomas told Judge Pryor, the judge later recounted in a letter, that, like him, Crystal had overcome a lot of adversity early in life to go and succeed in law school. The justice told him, he wrote, that there had been false media reports about her and that the stories were contrary to his assessment of her character. Judge Pryor had already hired law clerks for that year, but he recommended 2 lower court judges who both offered Ms. Clanton clerkships. She chose Judge Corey L. Mays, a Trump appointee to the federal district court in Alabama, and went to work for him after her graduation from law school in May of 2022. In the Thomas's holiday newsletter that December, Ms. Clanton was featured in a swearing-in photo with the caption, "Admitted to the Alabama bar," and in a cap and gown portrait as Crystal Clanton, parentheses, near daughter, unparens. So she gets some good publicity in the Thomas's annual Christmas letter and whatnot. Okay. The next year, she went to work for Judge Pryor. Wow. A high-profile jurist whose decision to hire her reignited the text message controversy. Democratic lawmakers in the House Judiciary Committee, led by Representative Hank Johnson, Democrat of Georgia, raised concerns that someone accused of racism would be so highly placed in the court system. They demanded an investigation into the hiring decisions by both Judge Pryor and Judge Mays. These 2 federal judges hired an individual with a widely reported pattern of racist and bigoted conduct, the lawmakers wrote in a November 2021 letter to Chief Justice John Roberts and Judge Charles Wilson, who was then the most senior active judge on the 11th Circuit. In the eyes of the public, she will be one of those judges' closest advisors with special access to the judicial decision-making process. Judge Pryor defended his decision in a letter to Judge Wilson. Ms. Clanton, he said, was highly qualified, had received a full merit scholarship to law school. That's how come we know she's so good, right? even though who knows why they decided to give her that scholarship, was in the top 5% of her class. That can't be faked. Well, presumably. Although, I guess you could lean on people for good grades, but I don't know that they did that. And received the top grade in a summer course taught by Justice Brett Kavanaugh. And that maybe could be arranged. A law school spokesman declined to answer questions about Ms. Clanton's tenure at the law school, citing student privacy laws, and that's proper. Judge Pryor's letter was obtained by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. The letter Justice Thomas wrote describing how Ms. Clanton came to live with them, which he sent to the same judge, was also obtained by the Atlanta paper. Judge Deborah Ann Livingston. Oh, it's time for us to play our outro music and get out of here. Judge Deborah Ann Livingston, who investigated the matter, said she did not find evidence that the judges had engaged in misconduct, concluded that they had done proper due diligence, and dismissed the matter. After further review by federal judges, the inquiry was officially closed in October of 2023. In the fall, Ms. Clanton will join 3 other clerks for Justice Thomas as he begins his 34th term on the court. So there you have it. All you got to do is stumble into Ginni Thomas's path, be invited to come live with her and the justice for a year because you've lost your job because of racist texts, and you're set up for life. There you have it. And I don't know why I was reminded of the fact that Moms for Liberty co-founder had gotten herself caught up in some sort of strange 3-way power dynamic. I'm just saying that it did come to mind, and that Republicans are constantly upset about the prospect of grooming and yada yada, something local beauty pageant girl ended up living with the Thomases for a year. It just happens. It just does. That's life. What can I tell you? Weirder things have happened, and some of them will be described by Justice Putnam on the West Coast's Cookbook and Speakeasy. Coming up next, that was some segue, right here on Netroots Radio.
From netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Ooh, I missed this one. Trump had an overnight panic attack over Joe's massively successful fundraiser held with former Presidents Obama and Clinton. And more from around the country and around the world. Trustees of Tennessee's only publicly funded historically black university were, you'll never guess, removed by the mostly white, Gop-dominated state legislature. Holy cow. Stay tuned.